The Beginner's Bible.
A Good Heart. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 1 through chapter 16, verse 13.
Saul was a good king for about 20 years. Then he began to disobey God. God was sorry he made Saul the king. Samuel was sad about it too. God sent Samuel to a man named Jesse to find a new king. When Samuel met Jesse, he said,
"I would like to meet your sons."
When Samuel saw them, he thought, "These are strong-looking men." God said,
I do not look at the outside of a person. I look at the inside of a person. I look at the heart.
Samuel asked Jesse.
"Do you have another son?"
Jesse said,
"Yes, his name is David. He is out in the field with the sheep."
Samuel asked to see him. As soon as David arrived, God told Samuel,
He is the one I want to be the next king.
Samuel anointed David. He poured oil on David's head, and David was filled with God's power.
David and Goliath. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 1 through 51.
The Philistines were enemies of God. Their army came to fight King Saul's army. A giant soldier named Goliath yelled,
"Bring out your best soldier to fight me. If your strongest soldier defeats me, we will be your slaves.
He boomed.
If I defeat him, you will be our slaves."
King Saul's soldiers were afraid. They did not want to fight the giant. Meanwhile, young David was taking food to his brothers. They were soldiers in King Saul's army. When David reached the camp, he saw Goliath. David heard the giant's challenge. "I am not afraid to fight the giant," said David. King Saul called for David and told him,
"You cannot fight the giant. You are too young."
David replied, "God will be with me." King Saul gave his armor to David, but it was big and heavy. David wasn't used to wearing armor. David went to a nearby stream and picked up 5 stones. He stood before Goliath. The giant laughed at him. But David didn't care. He said,
"I come before you in the name of the Lord, who rules over all."
David put a stone in his sling and ran toward the giant. Then he let the stone fly. It hit Goliath's forehead, and he fell to the ground. The Philistines saw that their hero was dead. They ran away.
Best friends. 1 Samuel chapters 16, verses 14 through 23, and chapters 18 through 20.
King Saul became grumpy. His servants asked David to play his harp for the king. The music cheered him up. So the king invited David to live in the palace. David became friends with King Saul's son, Prince Jonathan, and Jonathan's sister, Michal. David won many battles for the king. The people said David was a better fighter than the king. This made King Saul very angry and jealous.
"Everyone likes David more than me,"
he thought. King Saul became so angry that he threw a spear at David. But David escaped. Then one day, Prince Jonathan warned David.
"You must run far away."
They promised to always be best friends.
King David. 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 4, and 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 3.
Saul chased David, but he never caught him. God watched over David. Then one day, David heard some sad news. King Saul and Prince Jonathan had died in battle. The people remembered what God had told them, and they went to find David.
David, you are now our king.
They exclaimed. King David ruled over Israel for 40 years. He wrote many songs about God, called Psalms. He even had plans to build a temple for God. David was a man who was dear to God's heart. When King David was old, he told his son Solomon,
You will be the next king of Israel. Be strong and obey God with all your heart. Then he will bless you.
The Lord is my shepherd. Psalm 23.
This is one of King David's songs about God. The Lord is my shepherd. He gives me everything I need. He lets me lie down in fields of green grass. He leads me beside quiet waters. He gives me new strength. He guides me in the right paths for the honor of His name. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid. You, God, are with me. Your shepherd's rod and staff comfort me. You prepare a feast for me right in front of my enemies. You pour oil on my head. My cup runs over. I am sure that your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever.